Welcome to Surrendering to the Signs. I'm your host, Laura Gates. I'm happy today to have Tesse Akpeki on our podcast. I met Tesse many years ago, and during the time of COVID, she reached out and she was starting a podcast. And I think I was one of the first guests on that podcast. And now she's one of the first guests on mine. So I'm super excited about that. Tesse has a list of accomplishments that are astounding. I won't even go into them. You can find them all on her website, but she works in communities. She works as a lawyer. She works as an advocate, and she's got an incredible list of accomplishments. She'll share some of that with us next. But mostly she's been, as many people that I'm talking to, on a quest to discover how to make more meaning out of the experiences that have happened to her. She and I both experienced the loss of a loved one tragically and suddenly. And we talk a little bit about that, as well as her journey back to a country that she didn't grow up in, but she found an affinity for in this path of finding what's next in her life. So join us. I'm here with my dear friend Tesse Akpeki, and we're going to talk about resilience in times of chaos and change. Tesse, tell us a little bit about you and your story. And I just want to say that I've so enjoyed our friendship and our conversations over the years. And I think I was one of the first guests on your podcast, and you're one of the first guests on my podcast. And it's been delightful to have this cross-Atlantic friendship from New York, well, first San Francisco, now New York to London. And I'm delighted to have you. So
and
welcome.
I'm so delighted to be here. And as you said, you were the first guest on my podcast, and what a wonderful guest you were. And you're going to be soon because I'm inviting you back. And you said, give you a bit of background. I'm going to start from where I am now and move a little bit backwards. I've just come back from a trip to West Africa, Ghana. And it's been an amazing trip. And during that trip, I found out lots of things about myself that I hadn't even known about. And that is that I still have quite a bit of African in me, which I wasn't very sure because I've lived in the UK for over 35, 40 years.
It's not been Britishized out of you with too many cups of tea and too many
You've got
crumpets.
it. I mean, I love this that you say tea. I didn't quite miss the rain because it was kind of warm every day, hot every day. But I've become very English. Lots of tea and scones and, kind of tea before bedtime, right? And I missed it when I was there. But actually, I realized that there's a lot of West African in me because my parents are Nigerian. And I spent a portion of my life in Nigeria. And that's the interesting thing, that I spent more of my life in the United Kingdom, first in London, where I was born, and then in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. So going to Ghana kind of brought different things together. So I'm actually speaking to you from a more, I think, holistic, healed place now, since I've come back from Ghana for different reasons, which, is quite maybe too long to go into. I ended up being in a children's home in Northern Ireland, and that was from the ages of 4 to 10, and ended up being there. And those are the early years. So they were very much shaping years. And then I joined my parents in Nigeria for the first time ever. So I am a creature of very different pieces and parts in different countries. And actually these days I call myself a global citizen because there are different parts of me that have been shaped by being in these different countries. In terms of my actual professional training background, I practiced law as a barrister in Nigeria, and in the United Kingdom, I practiced law as a solicitor, which is attorney, the equivalent to attorney in the States. I'm still an attorney, but what they would say non-practice. I still have my registration, but I'm not a practicing solicitor anymore. My other background is I'm a governance professional, coach and a mentor, and a trained facilitator. So I combine all those offers to reach out to people, support organizations, and hopefully to be of service to those organizations and those individuals. I think that gives you a flavor.
Yeah. And you have 2 podcasts.
I have 2 podcasts. I'm getting ready to launch the third one.
Oh my goodness. So you have things to say. You have a voice.
Well, I have a voice, but I think for me, what I found more thrilling is having a platform for other people to have their voices. When I've actually discovered that when other people heard on my platform, I get so much joy from it. As I have, which is called Tesse, talks about thought leadership. So it means that I'm talking to a lot of leaders and they're telling me what they're thinking. They're saying what is changing. And these days I do more work for universities in the United Kingdom. So I'm kind of like more in academia these days. And being a thought leader in academia is like gold dust. People love it. So that's Tesse Talks. And Tesse Leads, which you have been on board. Tesse Leads is very much about people telling their stories. So what's this story? How is it different? What's the narrative? What's the impact of that? What would you want others to know? That kind of storytelling, very powerful. It's wonderful. It's very, very, will I say restorative? And the one I'm launching is actually called Future Focus, Wellbeing and Resilience. So it's very much about focusing on the future, but using our sense of wellness or well-being and how resilience is showing up for us.
And you and I did those interviews during
Yeah.
COVID, and they were very much focused on the work of leadership, which you and I are
Yeah.
both in those fields. And since that time, we both also shared the tragedies of having lost our dear siblings. I lost my sister unexpectedly. You lost your brother. And I feel like that had an impact on both of us in different ways, different and similar ways in terms of our path. And the fact that we're having this conversation today, not necessarily about leadership, more about what happens when life throws things at us that we don't expect and how do we navigate that. So I'm curious how that's impacted you and what your story is around that, because I sense that this new podcast you're putting out around resilience and well-being, I'm guessing it stems from that experience or connected to that in some way. Is that
It's
correct?
connected in some way. I actually got into the resilience field a few months before Tony was killed. Tony's my brother. A few months before he was killed, I had set up a network called the Wellbeing and Resilience Leadership Initiative, and it was during COVID. So I set it up from, as kind of, where were you when COVID started? I was actually on vacation,
Mm.
so I thought for 10 days in Nigeria, and I ended up being in Nigeria for 3 months because I got locked down in Nigeria. Which was very interesting. It was during that time I set up the network. So Tony was still well and alive at that point. But the feedback from leaders saying that they wanted to know how they could support each other and how they could be supported by me and the resources that I could share was overwhelming. We're talking about over 2,000. Yeah, over
Wow.
2,000 points of interest, etc. And I was very happy if it had been 40 or 50, but I think of the time, because it was immediately when COVID hit off, I think there was a need for that. And I continued that, and it still continues to today in some form, not in the same form, but in a different form. A few months after that, I had launched my first podcast. And about 3 weeks after launching my first podcast, Tony was a pedestrian in a place called Dover in England, and a woman plowed into him, killed him, and left him. So it was a hit and run incident.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it was hit and run, and she took off. And actually, that now connects to resilience and well-being because the same resources and the same connections which I had set up, a lot of them are the same points that came to help me. You know, when they say build a bridge that you may never cross. Actually, I did not know that I was going to cross that bridge. But because I had kind of built this bridge and this initiative, when I actually spiraled into the darkness of loss and grief, which I'm sure, Laura, you went along, probably still are on, When I did that, there was a
Yes.
net to hold me. And that net to hold me, a lot of it was through the network that I set up and then through colleagues and friends who I'd made along the way. So I think in relation to resiliency, my actual take on resiliency is quite different from what it would have been before this happened. For me, resiliency
Mm.
now is about being in the moment and seeing how that moment
Mm.
unfolds and what emerges and being with that. And in that moment, you are forming a future, which is why my new initiative is called Future Focused Wellbeing and Resilience, because the past has gone. You can't do anything about the past. That past is for reference, not for residence. You can't stay in the past. To forget the past means that you might repeat the same mistakes or whatever it is. So the past is important, but for reference. We are in the moment and being present, having a leadership presence right now. Whatever comes our way, whether it's a shock, whether it's a success, whatever it is, we are present in the moment to ourselves, to others. We're conscious, we are aware, then we can be in the moment that can shape whatever happens next. Whatever happens next is our future. So the way that I look at that and that future, the track and the ability to do that, the capacity and the competence to do that is what I think makes us resilient. So different things like fragility, our vulnerability, our authenticity, all these things form our resilience. So I'm coming to resilience now from a different place. And I think hopefully a more practical, more relatable place whereby whatever comes and it comes and we see how we deal with it and what resources can help us to be in the moment to form and shape a future. Does that make any sense at all?
Oh, it's beautifully said. Thank you. And I love that the past is not to reside in; it's to refer back to. I can see how we can go backwards and spend far too much time there, and I tend to be forward a lot and not in the present moment in my way of operating, like, "What's next? What's next? What's next?" I feel like I have 2 curiosities. One is I feel like this is so perfectly timed for the world we live in right now in terms of it can be very overwhelming. There's an incredible amount of change, there's an incredible amount of chaos. I personally feel like meeting that moment is sort of, in a way, what we're built for, and I think launching this podcast in this moment is part of my goal is helping people make sense of change and transformation and embracing it versus feeling overwhelmed or dismayed by it. And a lot of that is showing up in the present moment and just being with what is. And I'm also curious because you said that going to Ghana has changed your thinking a little bit. So I'm curious if what you just described to us is the most current thinking or there's more evolution from what you just said. What informs that? Is that the culture? Is that the people? How are people living differently in those cultures than, say, where you and I are today?
You and I, we love this work, Viktor Frankl and meaning. And there's a new publication,
Mhm.
not new to him, but it was translated on Hope. And I downloaded that publication on Hope by Viktor Frankl yesterday. And actually, what I think that we are in this moment is there's so many moving parts, a lot of it that we don't have any control over. Our leaders are moving in different directions, right? There is a focal on other causing problems, etc. So we're not in that place of kindness and compassion and of dialogue and conversation. We're not in that place. We're really operating in different countries in a place of fear. You and I know that fear locks down our neural pathways. I mean, nothing much. Being in threat, being in flight, these are not a freeze. These are not good places to be. So for me, as a coach and as a leadership development person, working with, because now I work more collaboratively with other people in a way that I didn't, I mean, I was working collaboratively before, but even now, even so much more, because I just believe that the wisdom is found in those teamings and those partnerships and those collaborations. And so what we do is actually to develop strategies for ourselves and for the people that we are with so that they know when to be with those kind of hijacking moments, those kind of fearful moments. They know how to be with them. They know how to dial down, dial off, dial out. And then they know how to say, okay, how can we find those places and spaces that nurture us individually and collectively to thrive? So this is the kind of work we're doing, particularly with higher
Mm.
education, universities, whether they're postgrads or graduate course, whatever, we are doing this work and the universities are open to that. And when I say we're doing it, we're not necessarily doing it with the students, we're doing it with the professors, associate professors, we're doing it with the staff that support staff, professional support staff, etc., to equip them to be able to meet these moments and to be able to choose the right strategies and techniques that are needed in that moment. So to know when to slow down, to leave the space between what has happened, how they respond, rather than react. Yeah. All those kind of
Yeah.
those things, Laura, that you are so brilliant at working with people. This is a moment for people in general of all ages to take control over their own state because that's the only thing they can take control over. They can't take control over the rest. And then in those states, you can
Right.
now interrogate, investigate, and whatever. What do we collectively in our communities, in our workplaces have control over? What do we need to say, actually, this is not within our gift? What can we influence? What can we lead? So the circle of concern, the circle of influence, this comes to play. So this time, even though in many ways it's frightening, the choice has to be what do we choose to be in this moment? What do we choose to let go of for ourselves and for others? And what does that cost us? But what are the benefits? So in this place, hopefully will emerge excitement of opportunities and things that can be shaped in this place in disruption because we're really in that place of disruption and that place of chaos. And guess what? Laura, I learned this from you. It will pass.
It will pass, but it will leave us. First of all, I talk about the circle of influence like every day, right? Because people are, it's just so much. And people are trying to lead people, they're trying to lead their teams, they're trying to create products and services and take care of their clients. And yet the headlines go by every 5 minutes and it can be a jolt to the nervous system of just, and regardless of what side of the world or what side of the equation is on, I love that word disruption. We are in a time of disruption and upheaval. And we will look back 5, 10 years from now and things will not be the same. And that's true with technology and AI and machine learning and all these things that are happening in terms of that technological change. And I work with people who are very much in the forefront of that change. And I work with people who are burying their heads in the sand, hoping it's going to go away. And it's not. This is the time. And I do believe that we are built for this time. We are equipped for this time, including the tragedies that we've gone through and the heartbreak that we've gone through. I feel like it makes us more empathetic. I feel like it makes us wiser to be able to support others in this time. And I know that's part of a big part of your role. It's part of my role is how do we be guides? How do we be space holders for what people are experiencing right now?
Absolutely agree. And what I love about what you said, and I totally adore it as I adore you, is at times like this, we have experiences which equip us. And those experiences are not always joyful. In fact, in the times that you and I have spoken and the times in between, what I'm seeing is that I bought the myth of Hollywood and Hollywood Disney's about happily ever after. No such thing. There are things that are sad. There's loss, there's grief, and how we encounter that, how they are our allies, our friends, yeah, how they are our champions, rather than us being led down towards depression by acute sadness. How can we be in those moments, knowing that they're there, but also in connection with the humanity That saying that grief is a cost of love. How are we able to do that connected piece and sit with our pain and sit with our loss and live with it and still honor the lives of those who have left us, no matter how they left us? How can we do with that in empathy and with compassion for ourselves, for others, for what has happened? But knowing that as we live, if we do live, how can we live holding the losses that we have encountered, that we must encounter because that is life? So I feel that's a piece of intelligence, lived intelligence, that we don't sit with enough because we are so kind of running towards the next joyful, happy moment that the sadness and the other thing can get too painful. It's hard to live with. And that's another a piece of journeying that needs to happen. So our losses, our successes, our mistakes, whatever it is, they're all part of that journey, equipping us to be the people that we are, to
Right.
be what we be and do what we do, collectively and individually. So that's the way I see that. And my snapshot of all these things change, because if you'd spoken to me like a year after my brother was killed, that was not the place where I was. And what I learn about resiliency in these journeys is that where you are is right. Where you want to start is right. These are right. It's right because that's the moment we're in. That's the moment they're in. And sometimes if it's not aligned, then we think, okay, how can we get to a place where we are aligned in the context that we are? Context is everything. So that's that piece. But the second piece you mentioned was what happened in Ghana and why was that different? That's an interesting one because when I went to Ghana, I didn't know anyone. I'd never been there before. I've only heard about it. I
Okay.
heard about it from my late brother Tony. I heard of it from my brother John. I said, Ghana's a great place. So it seemed like the place to go, right?
So this was sort of a pilgrimage for you to go there because of your brother?
No, it was actually related to a work thing that we had planned that didn't happen.
I love it. I love these things, these kind of signs and synchronicities, right? Amazing.
Yeah. And it was supposed to be for a retreat, a leadership retreat in Ghana that didn't happen. But because I'm somebody who planned, I had planned it because I thought it would definitely happen and I bought my ticket. And I thought, the first thing I was like, oh, I went into this, why did I do this, etc. And I was like, give myself a few slaps.
All
But then
right.
what happened was I had to get over and get with the program and say, look, if I'm going to go out to Ghana, I need to make the best out of it. Now I began to see it as an adventure. So rather than see it as something that happened that went wrong, something this, I now saw it as this is
Mm.
an adventure. Let me be an explorer. So I took on the presence of an explorer, of an adventurer. I think I started to breathe
Wow.
and took my anti-malarias because they have malaria out there. You definitely have to take yellow fever. So I got my yellow fever certificate there. And then I thought, okay, let me go. And I went. I'm going to ask a few questions, of course. So I asked a few questions from Ghanaians who were in the United Kingdom. And then I went, and that was as sketchy as it was. And then I got into the Accra, where the airport was. It just felt different. From the time going in, it just like a breath of fresh air. And it started that way. And every day, there was something different to do. Whether it was visiting a castle where
Mm.
slaves had
Mhm.
been held during the slave trade days. One of the ones I visited was called the Elma Castle.
Mm.
Whether it was visiting the beach and the resort, Coconut Grove was another place that I went to, and it was a resort and people do retreats there. So I went there. Whether it was visiting Nkrumah's memorial, and this is one of their first presidents after, in fact, he was their first president after they got their independence from the United Kingdom, Great Britain. I went there. These were all the different pieces. And then one of my favorite places was the botanical gardens and a place called Aburi, and being with the plants and the trees
Right.
and the butterflies, and they do have
Right.
and all these things and the fruits they had, etc. So for me, I think what was different was actually being in an unfamiliar environment, doing a combination and a weaving of historical, current things, past things, looking at future things because they have future stuff going on, their future projects, looking at that. And then having a culture which was not the same as the Nigerian culture where my parents come from, but similar. So similar, not the same. So I think that, and then being in a crucible of with people who are so friendly and so welcoming. I mean, I think that what really happened, and you asked a beautiful question, is that that place out of my environment in the United Kingdom, going to a different environment in somewhere
Yeah.
that was similar, not the same, was a bedrock for me to think about things to
Wow.
thrive and flourish after loss. So when I was there, I hardly looked at my emails, any of those things. It was just like I cut off enough for people to know that I'm still alive, but not enough to work. And actually, I don't think I've ever really done that. I don't think I've ever really switched off, ever. I've worked most of my life. So switching off, and this time I just switched off. Most of the time I just took to journaling, writing my journals, writing my poetry and thinking and just enjoying the sunshine and the moon and the sun. The sun actually at sometimes is so hot that it looks almost orange. So I was able to notice these wonders. And I think that it was just beautiful. When I came back to the United Kingdom, I felt I was a different person again, but different in a kind of more open kind of, okay, what happened to my brother happened to my brother, however he would want me to live my life. So it was like a new chapter seemed to have opened up.
It sounds very healing also. Yeah. Nature can be so powerfully healing. I know this is not financially available to everyone, but I do think that getting outside of your comfort zone, even maybe going to another part of the United States sometimes just to get a different experience, even if you can't travel globally. But I've been lucky enough to have that experience and lived in different countries. And it is such a game changer to have that different perspective and just immerse yourself in a different culture, different language, all of that, right?
Absolutely. I think what you said is something that is important for everybody. Sometimes to leave the environment that you're familiar in and familiar with and go to somewhere which is less familiar, which is less known. And hopefully, depending on what it is, if there can be adventure, you're able to enter into the adventurous part of it, then fine. But if that's not what you want to do, what is right for you, if it's just kind of like doing something where you can pace yourself, find your rhythm, which is not in that place of disruption and pain and hurt, try and find somewhere where you're calm and you can soothe yourself. I think that would be for everybody, you know. And if it's not possible to leave to another part of the country or leave to another country, then find somewhere. In my case, I live in Wembley, and I've done this in the past. I've actually gone to a hotel in central London. But whatever it is, it's just to have a shift of energy, really, a shift of state, and to reflect and have new possibilities.
This is going to sound totally strange. It's not the Sophie tell, but I had a little bit of a family medical emergency this past weekend, and I had to drive to another state and spend 3 days, for the most part, in a hospital. And it was the best hospital I've ever been in. The staff was incredible, the doctors were incredible. The person I was visiting, they had a rotation of people next to them in the bed next to them, and just the way they treated people was so phenomenal. The way they communicated with us was so phenomenal, and I feel like I was just immersed. I should probably write them a letter to the head of the hospital. I felt like and I'm just realizing this as I'm telling you, Tesse, I haven't thought this through until just now of like, we work with leaderships leadership and team building and teamwork. And to see this group of people operate so effectively as a team with this place was gigantic, thousands and thousands of patients coming through on a regular basis in high levels of trauma. Most of them, we were on kind of a high risk trauma type ward. How they communicated with each other, how they shared information, how they passed the baton on to the next person coming in the room. They were all aware of what the person before them had done and what was coming up next. I mean, every time we asked for something, it was there. At some point, someone came by with a cart of coffee and even asked us if we wanted coffee with cream or sugar. And I thought she was joking, but she was serious. And I think that cultural experience, if we really open our eyes and ears, we can have that anywhere we go. I want to go back to one additional piece that we have in common, which is what you were talking about, the healing of grief, because I feel like that's something I thought I was really good at. I thought I was good at death and dying and grieving. I've just been with people actually as they passed over. I've had many elderly people in my life pass on. I've had people close to me who had illnesses who passed on. There is really something otherworldly about a sudden, unexpected, unplanned death that is so shocking. It's a completely different kind of experience, right? And then in your situation, also the factor of someone not acting in a way that we would have in accordance to our values of stopping and taking care of someone added on top of that. So when I listen to you say that it's been this amount of time that you've needed to process all that before you could step away and have this healing experience, that's something that I can relate to also. Of I look back at the last several years and it's almost a bit of a blur of, wow, I was going through my life and getting things done, and I can't even believe that I did that. It's like what we're capable of as humans to overcome an unimaginable grief and still come out the other side with gratitude, not gratitude that this person is no longer with me, but like you said, such deep love for this person, a deep connection with this person. I personally feel like I'm still connected with this person. It's just in a different form. So I'm just curious for you, your experience of that loss in that way that I think is very different than knowing it's happening through illness or old age or that kind of thing.
What you're pointing to, which is really helpful, useful, supportive, is that sudden death is traumatic. Not all grief is traumatic. The trauma in
Right.
grief is what makes it complex, something that was unplanned, unseen, unexpected, is not the same. Now, I'm not saying that someone dying from cancer after many years, or somebody who has dementia and dies and has been not the person they were for 5, 6 years, etc., that is less painful. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that the access points for coming to terms with and understanding what has just happened are
Right.
different when you know that it's along the line and in a way have factored that in. So what you have is
Yes.
anticipatory grief. And when someone their life has just ended like suddenly, that is traumatic grief. And there are
Yes.
different types
Yes.
of grief. So actually, I think the awareness and the understanding around it is to recognize that grief comes in different shapes, in different forms, different modes, and to have a certain awareness and consciousness around that difference, right? And the other thing you were talking about, which was you've done this and so ever, what came into my mind was sometimes doctors make the worst patients. And what I mean by that is not that you're the worst patient, that's what I mean, but it's easier to do for others than to do for yourself. And in that, and this is something that I'm learning more of, I'm actually reading more of, asking more of, listening more, is to actually have self-compassion around times like that. Because there'll be lots of things in our mind saying, should have. I should be do like this. I do this for others. And that in itself is similar to other saboteurs, that are judgmental. Whereas that spirit, that role of compassion, of self-love, it comes into this. You've lost your sister suddenly, a sister who you loved, a sister who you did so much with, whose company you were there. Love is a very powerful thing. Those bonds of love, they're never destroyed. And to have it just cut suddenly, no, that's acute. That's like ripping out your heart.
Finding back, what it sounds like you did in Ghana, finding back that joy, finding back the meaning and the purpose. When you had a companion that you were on the journey with, that you thought, oh my gosh, we're going to be two old ladies on the beach cracking each other up till one of us keels over for a long, long time. And then that story changes and you have to readjust to a new story. And I just find this whole concept of grief so fascinating because people would say to me, Laura, you need to take time out to grieve. Well, sometimes you just need to get through the freaking day and survive. And for me, that's my work. That is my survival. The people I support, the work that I do in the world is what gives me meaning and purpose. And then I would crawl up in a ball, but I could not be in a ball in a heap for months and months on end. That would have been the end of me. And I think we all have to find our way through that process in our own path and in our own timing.
I totally agree. And it's a journey. Kubler-Ross's work and David Kessler and these grief experts, very, very powerful. What I think is that we find our own grief pathway. What is our pathway? We find what works for us and at what stage it works for us. Because coming back, as I said, coming back from Ghana, I saw a possibility, a new chapter. I'm still on the journey. And it actually is taking the time that it needs, but also if it needs to be in distraction and escapism, that's okay too. That's probably what keeps one alive. And I think people do what is right for them. Everybody does what is right for them, and let nobody tell you should do it this way. I've had people who have said to me, oh, it's been this length of time. Why are you still hurting? Whatever. And I listened to what David Kessler said at one of his talks. He said, is my son still dead? Yes. I will take as long as it takes. You celebrate your birthday every year? Yeah. I will celebrate my son's death day every year. It's kind of a normalization of grief, the grieving process for that person. There's some people that have not grieved for the person they lost for 10 years. They haven't actually cried for 10 years. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. No, I'm not saying that. But for me, if somebody comes to me, and I actually had someone who said to me, oh, Tessie, my brother died 27 years ago and I have not cried till now. And I said to the person, how are you feeling? They said, well, it's actually good to cry. And I said, well done. For someone who was in part of your life, that person's spirit is for eternity. So to me, 27 years, 5 years, even the mother, I wouldn't even say even, the mother who loses a baby and the baby might be 12 weeks, that's a loss. That is a loss. So, what we're talking about is humanizing and normalizing loss as something that's part of life, but actually saying for each person, each experience is unique and different. When I lost my mother was different from when I lost my father. When I lost my brother, and I've lost 3 brothers now, all of them have been different. If I lose someone else, it's different. So what we're talking about is how do we create the cultures that are emotionally and socially intelligent to these things? And that connects to something else you were saying in the hospital environment. That is culture. That culture was a culture that was a healthy culture. And when I kind of look at you and I listen to what you're saying, that's the work that you do. You work collaboratively with organizations, with individuals to have cultures, to host cultures, to shape cultures, to mold those cultures, to actually encourage the agility and the flexibility that they need and compassion and competence and capability so that when people hit these points, these touch points, transitional points, when they are thrown into situations that this is needed, those cultures are already formed and shaped to hold that space. That makes what you do worthwhile.
And you know what's fascinating is that I didn't see a mission statement, I didn't see a vision statement, I didn't see a corporate strategy, but as I'm thinking of it and listening to you, I feel like the culture was the patient comes first. The patient and the patient's family come first. It was open 24/7 to visitors. There was valet parking. There was coffee with cream and sugar on demand. You could have as many people in your room as needed. Like, clearly, there were people who were passing on who had many, many people visiting them. I've just never experienced anything like it, and it w no one ever said to us, "You're in the way." They kept saying, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for visiting. It really makes a difference that you're here." It was a completely different cultural experience. I love the way you're describing that, and it's like, I got the sense that the patient and the patient's family came first, not because someone told me that or put it in a brochure.
And I love what you're saying. Again, I'm saying love and using it so many times because that's how it was a culture of love. However, underneath that, there was a lot of work that went on to get it to a place where it was integrated into the way that people did things, the way they were, how they were thinking, how the patient's family, friends, colleagues felt valued. And there's something that I came across, and this is a saying that it's impossible to shine a torch for someone else without it reflecting back to you. But those are the kind of cultures that nurture the individuals as well. So they're not just giving and people are receiving, they're actually getting back that what they're giving. Usually when you have cultures that are very hurtful, very exclusive, very toxic, it reflects back what is going on in their interactions, in their mindsets, in their around them. And if you trace back, you will see that the leadership, and there's a leader in all of us, is not helpful towards building a healthy culture. So you have to uproot that stuff. You have to actually take it apart to put it back again in the healthy way. So this example that you have seen and you have lived is one that needs to be bottled and used as fragrance and topped up when need be. It's interesting because when people live in a place of scarcity, that's what happens. And when I mean it's scarcity, not just money, the mindset, the scarcity mindset rather than abundant mindset. We have love, we won't run out of it. We have care, we won't run out of care.
The joy you felt, you were talking about Ghana and a lot of poverty in that country, right? And it's interesting. I've heard this before about African countries. First of all, there's just huge future potential, I think, in those countries. And like, people will talk about how they bypassed underground electrical wires and just went straight to the cell phones, which helped them race past a lot of other cultures in terms of how they do business, how they interact with each other. I have this feeling of people are just kind of resourceful and figuring things out light years ahead in some ways. I'm curious your thinking on that culture-wise also.
What I saw was I saw a country which it has its own disparities. You have very, very rich people and people who are quite poor, and also anything in between. But what I did see was an openness and a curiosity to welcome the stranger. And I never felt like an outsider there. Never. And the, I know that there are exceptions, but the people tend to be quite calm and peaceful. And for me, like an example was when I was leaving, I bumped into someone and I said sorry. And the person looked at me and said, okay. And that is so unusual because in London, you bump into someone, you can get someone swearing back, swearing at you. Even though you said sorry, they can ignore you, swear back at you, even though you said sorry. And I think that we're very easily activated, very, very easily activated in our culture, in particularly in London. We're very easily activated. I just sense that wasn't the case there. And there is something I think about pacing.
Like we're in a rush all the time. We're late all the time. We're looking at our watches all the time. We're living and dying by the Google Calendar. Speaking from my own personal experience.
I mean, there's a practice I'm doing. I don't know how long it will last, but so far 1 month I'm still going, which is to take my schedule every day and kind of work through a time that is getting myself together time, because that's a time when I can go into myself. Now I know that because I am self-employed, because I'm my own boss, I have more control over doing that. But I think there is something for people, even if it's for 5 minutes, to just go in and do the body scan and see, how am I? What do I need right now? And to do it so that there is more of presence from within that can connect with what is without.
Right.
There's something about being in the moment in a way that we are able to respond rather than to react to whatever is going on. So that's something I've been practicing. And that consciousness came more from being in Ghana because I liked what I saw. And I know that every day I might not be able to do that, but I will try I'll be intentional every day. And if I think, okay, I didn't do it today, then if I live and it's tomorrow, then I can try again tomorrow. But it is that piece about having more consciousness about the state I want to be in and how I connect that with the world that I'm in.
What I really like about that is it brings us full circle in this conversation to where we started of how do we navigate these times of change and chaos. And really it's about bringing that intentionality, knowing what is within our sphere of control, what is not, and how we show up, how we're being as we're going through the day has such an important place, right? Like if you bump into someone in the street and you don't yell at them, you might change how the rest of their day goes, right? And that one tiny little encounter, just like the encounter where you bump into someone and they do yell at you, and then that can spill into the next encounter and the next. It's like, I don't think we realize how these very small actions add up over time, both negatively and positively. And that's why every time I encounter someone in a service role, I do my best to connect and ask them how they're doing, because it's not always easy. And I just try to be a force of good in the world when as much as I possibly can.
I love what you're saying. And I love this conversation. And I was talking to the vicar in our church one day, and there was just so much going on at that point. And what was going on for me to do with my health, it wasn't great, and other things. And he looked at me and Tesse said, one practice that can be helpful sometimes is when something good happens or something that is positive happens or whatever it is, to note it, to take notice, to observe it and note it. I listened, because I journal, I wrote it down in my journal. I started the next day. I was amazed at how many positive things happen in one day. Then when I started noticing, because I wasn't intentionally noticing them before, and now I'm intentionally noticing them, I began to find that my spirit was lifting because the number of positive encounters, the number of
Wow.
supportive encounters, the number of places where I have been able to connect with others were so much more, like 3 times more than the ones that were not so great, that I thought, I like this practice. So noticing with the person who opened the door and let me go through,
Mm.
the person who allowed me to open the door for them and they went through and said thank you. I just feel that since this thing has come into my life, I feel that I'm growing because I'm like more appreciative, more of gratitude. So that when the other things which are not so good are happening, what I'm finding is I'm saying, well, I'm not denying, it's not like unrealistic optimism, nothing like that. But I'm able to have more perspective of it. It's an easy practice because you can be whinging all the time about whatever. And yet there's so much positivity. Those moments happen every day. Laura, I can say to you that the moment that I saw you, which was in 2007, I think it was, you stood out. And there's that thing about who stands out is the person who's unique and different and special, and that's you. So thank you.
Well, I want to thank you for seeing me and connecting with me and being with me today. And I'm sure we'll have many more conversations as far ranging as the topics that we had today. And I'm so grateful and appreciative of you in my life, Tessie. Much love to you and look forward to our next conversation. Where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Tesse Akpeki. And also my podcast can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and Tessie Talks, Tessie Leads. And that's me.
Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. Bye-bye.
Leaving the old life behind, giving the new one a try, making the past as we go, trying a new way to grow.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Surrendering to the Signs. I hope you found it inspiring. Please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Also, feel free to hop on over to surrenderingtothesigns.com, where you can download our free e-guide with examples and your own workbook to help you identify your signs. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode and wish you well.
Ways to make us fly, all of the chances we have.